All right, so get this right. Imagine if you were born back in 1900.
Okay.
You'd have seen like the world change so much like crazy in just your lifetime.
Wow.
From horses and buggies
Right.
all the way to atomic bombs.
It's unbelievable.
That's insane.
Yeah.
But hold on tight, because today we're diving into something even more mind-blowing.
Okay, even more insane than that.
A weapon so out there that most people haven't even heard about it.
You're going to have to tell me more about that. I'm hooked.
We're talking about this thermonuclear weapon called, it had this code name.
Okay.
Sundial.
Sundial.
Yeah, and it was dreamt up during the Cold War arms race.
Okay. I mean, that whole period was just like one terrifying arms race after another.
It was pretty wild. And we've got all sorts of stuff to like really dig into this. We've got declassified documents, you know, historical analyses, scientific papers.
The whole shebang.
Yeah, the whole shebang.
I love it.
To unravel the story of this weapon.
Okay, so Sundial, this sounds almost like peaceful, like something you'd find in a garden.
Yeah, right?
But I have a feeling it's anything but.
Oh, yeah. Definitely not peaceful at all.
Okay, so to understand just how insane this weapon was, we got to talk numbers.
Okay.
We got to talk about its proposed yield.
Right.
10,000 megatons.
Wait, 10,000?
10,000 megatons.
Okay, hold on for a sec. For like anyone who needs a refresher,
Yeah.
the bomb dropped on Hiroshima.
Right.
That was 15 kilotons.
Kilotons, exact.
And even the Tsar Bomba,
Oh, yeah. The big one.
the biggest nuke ever detonated, that was only 50 megatons.
Right.
10,000.
It's a whole different ballgame.
That's a whole different level.
Oh, yeah,
The
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So can you like break that down for me? Like what does that kind of energy actually mean in the real world?
Okay, so when we talk about these massive nuclear weapons, we got to use this thing called TNT equivalent
Okay,
to measure their energy.
right.
All right, imagine a stick of dynamite.
Okay.
Now picture the energy released by that stick of dynamite.
Mm-hmm.
Multiply that energy by 1 billion.
Wow.
That's 1 megaton.
Okay, so 10,000 of those.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just talking blowing up a city. We're talking like reshaping continents.
Yeah, you're getting it. To put it into perspective, imagine a pyramid of explosives,
Okay.
13 times taller than the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Oh, wow.
That's the kind of destructive power we're talking about with Sundial.
That's wild.
3,000 times more energy than all the explosives used in World War II.
That's just, I'm speechless.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try to wrap our heads around this.
Okay.
If we actually detonated this thing,
Uh-huh.
what would happen besides the obvious, everything gets vaporized?
Okay. Well, for starters, everything within a 400-kilometer radius of the blast
Okay.
would instantly burst into flames.
So like a giant firestorm.
We're talking a firestorm engulfing an area the size of France.
Oh,
And the heat would be so intense that it would melt sand and other materials into this glassy substance
yeah.
called trinitite.
Right, like at the Trinity test site.
Exactly just like that.
Okay, so it's not just an explosion. It's like a giant earth-melting laser. And that's just the immediate impact.
Right.
What about like the global fallout, the, literal and figurative?
So the detonation would trigger massive earthquakes and tsunamis, the kind that could reshape coastlines.
Oh, wow.
And get this, the sound of the blast would literally circle the globe.
Really?
Remember the Krakatoa eruption in 1883?
Yeah, vaguely.
It was heard almost 5,000 kilometers away.
Wow.
Sundial, much, much louder.
So we got firestorms, earthquakes, tsunamis, and a planet-sized sonic boom.
You get it?
What else?
Didn't the research mention something about massive clouds?
Right, yeah.
So picture this monstrous pyrocumulonimbus clouds, basically firestorms reaching up into the atmosphere.
Wow.
These clouds would inject huge amounts of smoke and soot high above the Earth,
Okay.
potentially triggering what scientists call a nuclear winter.
In clear winter.
Yeah,
That sounds pretty cheery.
it's not great.
So what exactly does that involve?
Essentially, it's like a period of global cooling caused by all that smoke blocking out the sunlight. Temperatures would plummet, crops would fail, entire ecosystems would collapse.
So we're talking global famine.
On a scale that's difficult to even imagine.
And then on top of all of that, there's the radioactive fallout.
Right.
I mean, this thing was basically a giant dirty bomb.
You're not wrong. Sundial would generate an astronomical amount of radioactive material, about 300 tons of fission product.
300 tons.
To put that into perspective, that's more than all the radioactive fallout from every single atmospheric nuclear test combined.
So we're talking contamination on like a global scale.
Yeah.
I mean, what would that even do to the planet long term?
It's hard to say for sure, but the predictions are pretty grim. Widespread contamination, long-term health problems like cancers, birth defects, potentially even genetic mutations affecting future generations.
So it's a pretty bleak picture, to say the least.
Yeah, it's not great.
Okay, so we've established that Sundial was pretty much the ultimate doomsday device.
Yeah.
But here's the question that's been bugging me. Why on earth would anyone even think about building something like this?
That's where things get interesting.
Okay.
Because as powerful as it was, Sundial was ultimately impractical.
Impractical?
Yeah.
How can something that can melt continents be impractical?
Well, for one thing, transporting and deploying something that massive would be a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, imagine trying to move a bomb the size of a small house.
Right.
And then there's the issue of control.
Okay.
Remember, this thing could set a country the size of France on fire.
Wow.
The potential for uncontrollable collateral damage was just too high.
So even during the Cold War, when everyone was obsessed with building bigger and badder bombs,
Right.
there was a line they wouldn't cross.
Exactly. The prevailing strategy at the time was mutual assured destruction.
Right.
Or MAD, as it was aptly named.
Maybe.
The idea was to create a balance of terror, a sort of terrifying equilibrium,
Okay.
rather than relying on individual super weapons like Sundial.
So it was more about deterrence than actually using these monstrous weapons.
Precisely. Sundial, for all its terrifying potential, remained largely theoretical.
Okay.
There was a smaller prototype, a 1,000 megaton version called Gnomon, that was considered for testing in 1956.
Right.
But even that was ultimately deemed too risky.
I'm almost relieved to hear that.
Yeah.
But I am curious, what did other scientists think about all this?
Yeah, good question.
Can you imagine being in a room with someone who's casually proposing to build a bomb that could wipe out a continent?
Yeah, let's just say reactions were mixed.
Okay.
Some were utterly horrified, calling it an advertising stunt and worrying about the global consequences.
Right.
Others, well, they were probably a little too excited about the possibilities.
Okay, so we've got this super bomb that was thankfully never built,
Right?
but it makes you wonder, right?
Yeah.
What's the point of even knowing about this thing if it's just like a scary footnote in history?
Mm-hmm.
Does it have any relevance to the world today?
It's more relevant than you might think. Remember those thousands of smaller nuclear weapons we talked about? Well, if you combine their power, you'd be getting pretty close to Sundial's terrifying magnitude.
So even though we don't have these, planet killer bombs anymore,
Right.
the threat is still very real.
Absolutely. Even a small nuclear weapon could trigger a cascade of devastating consequences.
Right.
And with modern technology, the risks of miscalculation or accidental detonation are arguably higher than ever.
This is getting pretty heavy. We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
But there's still so much to unpack, from the evolution of nuclear strategy to the ethical dilemmas that come with this kind of destructive power.
Absolutely. So much more to discuss. Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about how even though Sundial was never actually built, the combined destructive power of all the nukes today could still reach that level.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it makes you wonder about how nuclear strategy has changed since the Cold War.
Right?
Is it actually safer to have all these smaller nukes instead of a few giant ones?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
People who like the idea of smaller tactical nukes say they actually make nuclear war less likely.
How so?
Well, they say it's because it lowers the threshold for using them.
Okay.
The thinking is that if a country thinks it can use a small nuke without starting a full-blown nuclear war,
Right.
then they might be more likely to use it in a smaller conflict.
But wouldn't that actually make things more dangerous?
Well, that's the big debate, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like a huge gamble.
It is. Critics of this approach say it's incredibly naive and dangerous.
Yeah, like playing with fire, but the fire is a nuclear explosion.
Exactly. They say any use of nuclear weapons, no matter how small, would definitely escalate into all-out nuclear war.
Oh, wow. So it's like opening Pandora's box.
Right. Once you unleash that kind of power, there's no going back.
So are we stuck in this, stalemate,
Kind of.
where the only option is to just keep threatening each other with mutually assured destruction?
Well, it's not quite that simple. MAD has been challenged in recent years, especially with new technologies like missile defense systems and hypersonic weapons.
Right.
Some people argue that these could actually make MAD less stable
Huh.
by giving one side the idea that they have an advantage.
Oh, I see.
Even if that advantage isn't real, it could make nuclear war more likely.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is.
The things that are supposed to protect us from nuclear attack could actually increase the risk.
Exactly. It shows just how complicated nuclear strategy really is.
Yeah, for sure.
New technologies and shifting global politics could make the situation even more unstable and unpredictable than before.
And that's terrifying.
It is a scary thought.
So if METI isn't as reliable as it used to be,
Right.
what other options do we have?
Well, many experts believe that the only real long-term solution is nuclear disarmament.
Okay.
They argue that the very existence of these weapons is just too dangerous for humanity, and we need to work towards a world without them.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But is it really possible in today's world?
It's a challenging goal for sure,
Yeah.
but it's not impossible. There have been times when we've made progress on disarmament.
Oh, really?
Like during the Cold War,
Okay.
there were treaties like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty.
So there is some hope for cooperation.
Absolutely. And there are lots of organizations and people working hard to make disarmament happen.
Like who?
The International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons,
Right.
or ICAN, they
Yeah.
won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for their work.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, they're doing amazing work.
It's inspiring to know that people are fighting for a safer future.
It is.
But realistically, how do we convince countries with nukes to give them up?
Well, it's a very complex issue. It requires a change in how we think about security.
Okay.
We need to move away from the idea that security means being able to destroy other countries.
Right.
And we need to build trust between nations.
That's not easy.
No, it's a long and difficult process.
But if we don't at least try, it's like we're just accepting the fact that we'll always live under the threat of nuclear war.
Exactly. And that threat affects everyone, no matter where you live or what you believe in.
Etc.
The consequences of a nuclear war would be global and absolutely devastating.
It doesn't even bear thinking about.
It really doesn't.
So this brings us back to Sundial.
Okay.
It's almost hard to comprehend the amount of destruction it could cause.
It really is.
Could the very idea of this weapon, even though it was never built, be a catalyst for change?
You mean like a wake-up call?
Yeah, exactly.
It's definitely possible. Sometimes it takes a stark and terrifying image to make people realize the danger.
Right. Like the photos of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Exactly. Those had a profound impact on the world. They made people aware of just how horrific nuclear weapons are.
That's true.
Maybe the story of Sundial can do the same thing. Remind us of what's at stake and why we need to get rid of these weapons.
It's a lot to carry this knowledge that such destructive power exists.
It is.
But they say knowledge is power, right?
That's true.
By understanding the history and the dangers of nuclear weapons, maybe we can help create a safer future, even in our own small way.
I completely agree. The more we learn about nuclear weapons,
Yeah,
the better we can advocate for policies that reduce the risk of them being used.
that makes sense.
And that's why conversations like this are so important.
I agree.
We need to challenge assumptions and explore every possible solution.
Speaking of conversations,
Yes.
I'm curious to hear what our listeners think about all of this.
Me too.
What stands out to you about the story of Sundial? Does it change how you see the threat of nuclear weapons today?
Yeah, let us know.
We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. You know, we've been talking a lot about Sundial, this like super bomb from the Cold War,
Yeah,
and what it all means for nukes today.
it's a heavy topic for sure.
It is, and it's easy to get lost in all the theory,
Mhm.
you know, deterrence and mutually assured destruction, all that.
Right.
But we can't forget that this stuff has real-world consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't lose sight of the human cost of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are like stark reminders of the damage these weapons can do.
They really are powerful reminders of the devastation these weapons inflict.
And those were tiny bombs compared to what we have now.
That's right.
It's scary to think about how much destruction a nuclear conflict could cause today.
Yeah, the potential consequences are almost impossible to grasp.
It's a lot to process, and it can feel really overwhelming.
It can.
But I think we have to remember that we're not powerless.
Right. We can make a difference.
Now,
We can learn about the dangers of nuclear weapons and teach others.
okay.
We can support organizations that are working towards disarmament,
Right.
and we can contact our elected officials and tell them to prioritize nuclear non-proliferation and arms control.
So our voices actually matter.
They do. Our collective action can really create change.
Like we've seen with other movements like the anti-apartheid movement or the campaign to ban landmines.
Exactly, people coming together, raising their voices, and demanding a better future.
So it can be done.
It can. And remember, nuclear disarmament isn't just some dream.
Right.
It's about survival. The longer these weapons exist,
Yeah.
the greater the risk that they'll be used either intentionally or accidentally.
So we're basically gambling with the future of humanity.
We are.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
Wow.
We've talked about Sundial. We've talked about how nuclear strategy has evolved.
Right.
And we've talked about the need for action.
Yes.
What's the takeaway message for our listeners?
The takeaway is the threat of nuclear war is still very real,
Yeah.
but it's not inevitable we have a choice.
Okay.
We can either keep going down this road of nuclear proliferation and risk a catastrophe,
Right.
or we can choose a different future one where these weapons are gone and humanity can finally relax.
That's a powerful message, and one that I hope everyone listening takes to heart.
Me too.
This has been a heavy deep dive,
It has.
but a really important one. We need to keep talking about this. We need to keep learning, and we need to keep pushing for a safer world.
Well said. And remember, even small actions can make a difference.
That's right.
Share this episode with your friends. Talk to your family. Get involved with organizations working towards disarmament.
That's a future worth fighting for.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the story of Sundial and the threat of nuclear weapons.
It was my pleasure.
If you found this episode thought-provoking, please subscribe to the show, like this episode, and share it with your friends.
Yes, spread the word.
Let's keep this conversation going.
For sure.
And let us know in the comments what other topics you'd like us to cover in future deep dives.
We love hearing from you.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.